Opening the center like this immediately invites an engaging tactical dance and vying for early influence. Instantly mirroring white's central pawn creates a balanced starting position, immediately challenging for the crucial d4 and d5 squares. Centering the knight now prepares for swift development and challenges black's central pawn. Developing a knight here naturally contests the center and prepares for pawn advances, a solid foundation for any early game strategy. Initiating the Lopez, a classical opening, white immediately stakes a claim on the center and prepares for aggressive pawn advances, creating a strategic duel for central control and piece activity. Challenging the bishop's influence, this pawn advance forces an immediate decision, potentially creating structural weaknesses or opening lines for black's pieces. Preserving the bishop's angle maintains pressure on black's central pawn and limits the knight's mobility. Unleashing the knight towards the center, this move pressures white's e4 pawn and develops a key piece, setting up potential counterplay. Safeguarding the monarch is paramount, initiating a defensive posture for the king and preparing for piece development. Solidifying the pawn center with d6 establishes a stable structure, preventing immediate pawn breakthroughs and offering the bishop a potential retreat square if needed. Reinforcing the center pawn, this move prepares a solid pawn chain and potential queenside expansion. Securing the bishop's retreat and preparing for kingside development, this piece elegantly bolsters black's harmonious development. Opening the central d-file suddenly intensifies the pawn struggle and challenges black's knight. Preparing a kingside fianchetto, black aims for long-term bishop development and potentially pressure on white's center. Reinforcing the d4 pawn while preparing development, this knight aims to join the central struggle and possibly support a future e4-e5 advance. Preparing for a swift kingside pawn advance, while simultaneously untangling the queen's path, offers a dynamic counter-initiative. Fortifying the central pawn and preparing for potential pawn breaks like d5 or e5 creates a robust structure. Developing the bishop to its natural diagonal creates good counterplay and prepares for the eventual pawn push in the center. The knight's retreat to f1 sets a quiet trap, aiming to reroute to g3 or h2 to support a central pawn push and reinforce the kingside. Securing the monarch signals readiness to engage in the center's brewing conflict. Developing the bishop to a central square pressures black's queenside and prepares for potential pawn advances in the center. Challenging white's bishop is a good idea, but it creates a slight weakness on the kingside. Shifting the bishop to a more active diagonal, preparing to pressure the d6 pawn and potentially open the h-file. Reconnecting the queen to the kingside seeks to bolster its defense and potentially prepare for future maneuverings. Repositioning the bishop to c2 prepares for queenside expansion and reinforces the kingside control. The knight embarks on an unusual sortie, aiming to reposition for potential queenside pressure or to disrupt white's central structure. Repositioning the knight towards the kingside opens lines and prepares a potential pawn storm or direct kingside attack. Bringing the knight to the central square prepares for a pawn break on f5, aiming to seize the initiative. Opening the center immediately, white challenges black's central control and aims to activate the bishop on c2. Reclaiming the central pawn opens up lines, but be mindful of the newly exposed e5 square and potential outpost for white's knight. Repositioning the bishop to g3 prepares for potential kingside pressure, eyeing the weakened dark squares around black's monarch. Trading knights removes an active defender, potentially opening lines for white's pieces toward the king's fortress. Opening the h-file offers attacking potential, but also exposes your king somewhat. Watch for counterplay along this newly created lane. Opening the d-file offers immediate pressure and potential for tactical skirmishes against white's king. Repositioning the queen to e2 opens the h-file for potential rook activity and prepares for a kingside pawn storm, aiming to exploit black's somewhat exposed monarch. The knight embarks on an ambitious journey to the queenside, seeking to occupy c8 and potentially support a queenside pawn push or a regrouping maneuver. Establishing control over the opened file immediately, preparing for a potential pawn advance or piece deployment. A defensive measure, this pawn advance secures the b5 square, but delays development and concedes central space. Refocusing the rook's pressure on the d-file now seeks to exploit potential weaknesses on that open path. The queen abandons the active central diagonal, sacrificing attacking potential for defensive solidity against potential knight forks. Reasserting control over the central d-file, white prepares to challenge black's passive pawn structure and potentially open lines for attack. Shifting the knight to b6 seeks to contest the d4 square and potentially attack on the queen side, adding dynamic pressure. Expanding on the queenside aims to seize space and potentially unravel black's king. Establishing the bishop on this central square shores up the kingside and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Shifting the bishop here subtly reinforces the kingside diagonal and prepares for future pawn advances, though it does invite a knight exchange. Liberating the d-file for your rooks, this exchange aims to disrupt white's central control and open up attacking avenues. Recapturing the rook opens the d-file, setting the stage for central play and potential pawn breakthroughs. Swapping off the bishop simplifies, but opens the file and weakens that queenside structure considerably. Unlocking the file for potential pawn, advances now creates immediate pressure on black's queenside structure. Shifting the queen to *e6** endeavors to centralize the piece and prepare for potential king's side activity, though it leaves the d-pawn somewhat exposed. Asserting central control with c4 aims to restrict black's queenside expansion and solidify white's pawn structure. Reactivating the bishop to a more active diagonal aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and create attacking potential. Breaching the pawn chain initiates a fight for space on the queen side, potentially opening lines for your rook. This knight's retreat to the 8th rank solidifies the queen side, but sacrifices immediate counterplay. Unlocking the d-file with the queen allows white to challenge black's pawn structure and potentially exploit discovered attacks down that open avenue. Sacrificing the queen to expose white's king opens new tactical avenues despite the material loss. Recapturing the pawn strategically opens the file for white's rook, creating winning endgame possibilities. Recognizing the impending material loss, black bravely seeks to reignite their attack by bringing the bishop into the fray, aiming to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure. Sacrificing a knight to unlock the queen and assault, the kingside offers immediate dynamic counterplay. Recapturing this way opens lines, but also exposes your king to potential attacks down the g-file. Securing the advanced pawn creates a dangerous outpost and disrupts black's structure. Re-establishing the knight's central influence is paramount. The queen side is currently a strategic dead zone. Targeting that undefended pawn with the queen can unravel black's queenside structure if they're not careful. The rook now occupies the open file, threatening to disrupt white's coordination and potentially create a passed pawn. Challenging black's queen on its current diagonal, hoping to exploit overextension. Prioritizing the king's safety, black seeks refuge from the open lines and potential checks. Shifting the queen to pressure black's central pawn structure and potentially force concessions. The queen boldly reclaims material, but exposes the king to potential checks and opens up the b-file for white's rook. Gaining central space opens lines for the bishop and pressures the king. Focusing on reinforcing the passed pawn's advance, this maneuver prepares to support its journey down the file. Snatching the pawn opens clear lines for your queen to infiltrate black's weakened queenside defenses. This relocation to the queenside seeks to consolidate material, hoping to disrupt white's central control and open new avenues for counterplay. Injecting pressure along the open 7th rank, this move forces a difficult decision for black's king. Seeking respite, the knight endeavors to regroup, aiming to rejoin the fray from a more secure square. Unleashing a forcing check, White aims to disrupt black's king's safety and potentially liquidate into a favorable endgame. Seeking shelter, the monarch vacates the threatened diagonal, preparing to escape through the kingside. Unleashing a powerful check, white seeks to exploit the exposed black monarch and dismantle its defenses. Seeking refuge, but the king remains exposed to open lines, making a swift regrouping paramount. Forcing the black king into a precarious position, this knight's sortie leverages open lines for a decisive attack. King's flight path is now dangerously exposed, with no defenders nearby. Capturing the pawn opens a deadly diagonal for the queen and exposes the black king. The monarch seeks shelter, but the white knight's advanced position and potential battery create constant unease. Shifting the king to safety is a prudent defensive maneuver given the exposed queen. Focusing the rook onto the open file offers immediate counterplay against white's exposed monarch. Securing the queenside pawn is a prudent step, aiming to solidify white's material advantage before further complications arise. King's safety deteriorates significantly, as the black monarch is now exposed to potential mating threats on the open diagonals. Sharpening the attack's focus by repositioning the queen to directly menace the weak pawns. Seeking a safe harbor, black's queen vacates the volatile e-file, potentially preparing for a defensive maneuver or a regrouping action. Forcing the black king to reveal its position on the board is the immediate benefit of this check. Sensing the trap, the king steps to a slightly safer square, away from the immediate mating threats. Pushing the passed pawn forward creates immediate pressure, forcing black to commit their king to a potentially dangerous square.